Hi, my name is Zainab, and today I'm making a presentation on the Sadeh Faki Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. My main question here is how did they do it? And by it, I mean, how did they become so culturally aware, legally sensitive, and so proactive in their efforts to make solid relationships with the tribal communities that they live that they live amongst? The reason I say that is because in 2023, I actually visited the museum with my family. We drove from Houston, Texas, all the way to Arizona. And going to this museum was one of the things that we were most looking forward to. When we got there, we saw this whole exhibit about NACPRA and its occasionally combative relationship with museums. And though NACPRA was something I was aware about, I hadn't really understood how hostile museums could be to some of the regulations in NACPRA, and I appreciated how clearly this museum actually talked about how difficult some of these repatriation initiatives can become because of the politics between museums and tribes and culture. So that's really what I mean by how did they do it? How did they become so aware and so proactive? And what can we take from that to improve our advocacy when we're trying to improve relationships between museums and tribes in other places? Hi, so before I go into the details about how the museum came to be, I want to talk a little bit about the physical aspects of the museum as they are today. So, in this top left corner, you're going to see a ball pit. So, basically, this is a court for different kinds of games that people from different villages around the area would play, from teams from the different villages during festivals, especially after the corn, squash, and beans have been harvested. It was a big festival time for them. You also see other structures that were built with stone but then covered in mud to preserve temperatures and also to keep making sure that the structures are waterproof. There's also outdoor structures to have a semi protected area for different kinds of outdoor activities during the year. On the inside of many of these buildings, there is examples of the pottery that was used by the people who lived there, all reddish pottery with designs that are quite intricate and geometric. These designs are mirrored on the outside of the building for the decorative aspects when people are coming in, so it's quite powerful. Here on the right edge of the second row of these pictures, you see a mural that was created taking inspiration from the artwork that would be present in the pottery. So it was quite, it was quite intricate and really resonates with the modern artists as well. This mural that's pictured was painted in 2023 when the museum was renamed from the Pueblo Grande Museum to the Sarevaki Museum, as it is named today. So the new name is much more closely related to the Salts River Indian community that is based in Phoenix, Arizona, and has a strong relationship with the museum. On the inside, there's also many interactive activities that are really designed for children, but also people of all ages to connect with the native history of Phoenix, Arizona. And I think it's quite beautiful that they've put so much effort into making sure that the information and the history is really accessible to everyone. They also have recreated a garden that represents the different kinds of crops that were grown by the Hohokam people who lived here from 450 AD to 1450 AD, including the classic crops, and they've tried to preserve the original methods of irrigation as well, canal irrigation, in growing these crops so people and visitors get a true sense of how the communities used the water, even the saltwater water around them, to make food. There's also many, many examples of pottery and art from the people who lived in this area displayed throughout the museum, and it's quite amazing. In a lot of instances, you'll see um, artwork represented in a picture instead of the physical object being there, because that object has been reclaimed by a tribe and returned back to that original tribe. So I want to start off now talking about the Hogan village, the whole preservation process and the timeline. So from the year 450 to 1450 AD, that's when the Pueblo people arrived and established their towns and created the largest canal irrigation system in North America at all. So they were growing corn, bean, and based squash for food, and they even grew some cotton for clothes. They had regular festivals and interactions with the neighboring Apache people. And we know this because of the presence of obsidian at some of these sites, which is the Apache people are very famous from. There were grinding stones, shell and stone jewelry, a lot of different things. Now, they would use the water from the Salt and Gila rivers around. They use that water to actually irrigate their crops, and so they have hundreds and hundreds of miles of canals going in to supply their water for their day-to-day needs, as well as for the crops needs. But by the late classic period, like towards the 1200s and 1300s, they were definitely dealing with a lot of flooding, and that made it difficult to survive, which is one reason why historians think the sites in that area were actually abandoned. A lot of by the 1800s, that's when the site actually got the attention of a lot of settlers. And kind of amateur archaeologists, as well as students who really wanted to excavate the site. So that's what was going on at the beginning until you get into the early 1900s. And that's when the Great Depression hits, and a lot of federal funding for these kinds of projects opens up with the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration. And so in 1924, when Thomas Armstrong actually donates 3 acres that have like the main mound site to the city of Phoenix, in the later years, actually, New Deal era programs helped with the restoration of the site and the creation of the museum. Thomas Armstrong was the Arizona Historical Society's president, and that's why he bought the land and donated to the city of Phoenix. Omar Turney at the time was a city engineer, and you have a picture of him here at the side. He lobbies further for even more land, 10 acres exactly, to be bought and added to the site so that the nearby canals could also be protected. Then in 1929, you also see Odd Helseth become the new museum director and city archaeologist. Now, he, like Thomas Armstrong, had no native heritage. Odd Helseth was from Norway, and he is the one who had the vision in general to create an educational and archaeological park with ethno-botanical gardens surrounding the area, as was shown earlier in the presentation. And he's the one who really utilizes the Civilian Conservation Corps and Works Progress Administration programs to actually build the museum. The first museum building actually only cost $14.95 because of all the salvage resources they used to build it, and because of all the labor they got from the New Deal programs. And the $14.95 he did spend was just on a box of nails, because you should probably have some new nails, I guess, if you're building a new building. Odd Helseth retired in 1960, and over the course of his tenure, he added 14 more acres to the museum grounds, and he doubled the size of the park. He also supported the rise of Maricopa pottery in the area, which is really kind of the main pottery that has been found here, and the main type of pottery that the surrounding Native communities still to this day create. After 1960, Donald Heiser became the next director. And right as he became director in the next couple of years, the National Park Service actually recognizes the Pueblo Grande mound site, as well as the Park of Four Waters, which is very nearby. They recognize it as a National Historical Landmark, so it's 2 separate ones. And so then after that, the city of Phoenix starts a land acquisition frenzy, and they acquire 72 more acres to add to the site. Now the park is 102 acres big, with no private property actually existing between the Park of Four Waters and the Pueblo Grande mountain site. So it's one contiguous area. And this was really important because at this time, also the Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix is also being expanded, and they want to secure the museum's location while also securing the airport, the land it needs to really expand. In 1974, the new museum building is actually constructed, and it's made to look like a truncated pyramid to give homage to many of the Mexican indigenous communities that the Hohokam people or the ancestral Sonoran Desert people are actually related to. There's a lot of red colored pottery that's done in bas relief on the outside of the museum, and many Mexican indigenous tribes actually came up to work on this to add their expertise and talents to the creation of the building. In 1977, the museum has had its first annual market, and now it's become the largest Indian market in the state, and continues to draw in Indian communities from all the Four Corners area to sell their wares and also celebrate together and have a festival together. From the 1990s onwards, there are major reorganizations that happened in the museum. So the museum director and the city archaeologist position up until the 1990s was the same person, so you'd have two titles. But from the 1990s onwards, the title is split between two different people. And there's continuous investment in the improvement of the area. There are new buildings that are built so that archival research and storage can happen. The new labs that are built. And in 2023, they actually renamed the museum from the Pueblo Grande Museum to the Sade Vaki Museum that I'm presenting on today. This is with very, very deep coordination with the Salt River Indian community that is the most prominent in the area. This is like a picture of the overall Pueblo Grande Mon site. Like I said, it's quite large, and there's many trails with the signs that describe what was happening in different areas of this village, and it's right next to the Salt River. So you can kind of see how the water came in, how close the water was, how they actually lived to sustain themselves. Now, it's important to know that there were a lot of preservation challenges in general that were going on, especially in the 1930s. And in this example, I'm kind of showing about how this archaeologist, Frank Midvale, he goes to Mr. Martin's land. He's a private landowner. He convinces him to let him do some digging to figure out, how intense of an archaeological site this is. He gets the digging, the results back. He's like, oh, it's a great site. There's several levels of construction we can excavate. He goes to try to find the funding, and the team comes back, and the whole site is ruined and leveled. Now, it's important to know that this is the post-Depression time, so a lot of people are trying to make the best use of their resources, so that's kind of, perhaps part of the reason why the site was leveled, but it was shocking, and it really speaks to how quickly Phoenix was losing a lot of its heritage sites and how important it was for the city to be preserving some parts of it, at least for posterity. So the other preservation challenges that the museum has been, the loss of land for other city initiatives, especially in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, the city of Phoenix really wanted to build new rail access points, and this would actually, make the museum easier to reach for a lot of Phoenix residents. But in that process, the land area of the museum decreased from 102 acres to 95 acres, because 7 acres went into the construction of that site and the whole transportation kind of storage depot that is located very nearby. And in general, Phoenix's like rapid urban growth challenges the integrity of many archaeological sites. NACPRA created a lot of new requirements for archaeological involvement for different construction projects, and that created a boom in city projects in general without relation to archaeology. Dr. Todd Boswick, who formerly was a city archaeologist, now just a couple of years ago, Phoenix got a new archaeologist. It's the first female city archaeologist in the city of Phoenix. He really was a hero in making sure that the museum was very compliant with NACPRA and very ethical in the way that it uncovered things. So In the 1990s, actually, the city determined that if no state or federal funds are being used for any kind of construction project in the city, then the archaeological team did not have to be involved because that's not what NACPRA required. Dr. Bostwick was unhappy with this. They tried to get a new version of an ordinance passed that would require the city to be involved in any kind of public development or any kind of development at all if there was a risk to an archaeological site. But unfortunately, that ordinance failed. But even then, he fought really hard for the city to be involved in as many construction projects as possible to make sure that nothing was being destroyed in the process that could that would be offensive to tribal communities, or that would result in a loss of historical understanding. He was also the person who made 98% of the cultural resources and artifacts of the museum available for return to tribes. So this is really important. It makes the museum a very big leader in returning artifacts and Native American human remains to tribes. As of 2023, the museum still has remains of 8 Native Americans. These Native Americans are not eligible for return. It's unclear why this is the case, but it's 8 folks. 8 people's human remains. Now, in general, when you're looking at NACPRA compliance, I want to kind of give it a sense of where Pueblo Grande Museum, the Sade Viking Museum, stands. So there's 8 museums not made available for return. This is basically, this ProPublica chart is comparing where the Pueblo Grande Museum sits in relation to other museums. So 98% of all human remains have been made available for return, and just 8 remains have not been made available for return. You see how low the remains is compared to the museums, and how high the amount of remains that have been available, how high a percentage that is of everything that the museum holds. From June 22nd, 2023 to May 31st, 2024, the museum also had a special Send Their Ancestors Home exhibit, which basically showcases NACPRA and the contentious relationship that many museums have with NACPRA, and how important it is for museums to really focus on their compliance, how important it is for the Indian communities, how important it is for the soul of the museum, and for the soul of the country. It was really, really quite an inspiring exhibit that kind of talks about the history of museums. The whole exhibit had a 24-minute audio presentation that goes through the history of this law and what museums have done in the past, or what archaeologists have done in the past to fund the sensibilities of tribes and their funeral practices. And the Salt River, Pima, Maricopa Indian community, and the Gila River Indian community were big partners in making this whole exhibit happen to the maximum accuracy that would be possible. So at the end of the day, like, how did they do it? How did this museum really become such a light forward for how tribes and museums can kind of work together to make sure that tribes get the artifacts and remains of their ancestors, while museums can still have authority and at least academic authority to report on the people they have lived amongst historically, or the people who lived there before. And really, it's difficult to say what can be replicated in other communities, because it seems like the heart and soul of the city of Phoenix is part of it is based on the preservation of Native cultures. And the fact that they had a city archaeologist so early, and still, the city archaeology is not really a real position that most cities kind of pay attention to. So, they not only had a city archaeologist so early, but they repeatedly hired archaeologists that cared about NACPRA compliance, about the feelings of the Native communities in the area. Maybe that is something that we can take to other communities that have museums that are a little bit reluctant. Maybe having a city archaeologist that is caring, that tribes can approve or disapprove of based off of how they perceive their openness to tribal input. Maybe having those kinds of people in charge in city government would really make a difference in the places as well. Thank you.